What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Flagship podcast. If you are listening to this, if you are just listening in your car or you've got us in the background as you're doing a chore, whatever it may be, it is not the usual voice that you're used to hearing to at the beginning of this illustrious podcast. I am not Chip Brown. However, I am his reasonable substitute, his usual co-host, Eric Henry. Chip Brown, the hardest working man in Austin. Every day, every once in a while, he gets a little vacation. So he is taking the time from SEC meetings. He has parlayed that right into an extended stay in the Sunshine State. He is down in Key West getting tan, enjoying himself. So in the meantime, brought in a special guest, Jeff Howe is in Oklahoma City covering the Women's College World Series. Jordy Scruggs is busy doing his recruiting thing. So I brought in the next best guest. He is our recruiting extraordinaire, Mr. Hank South. Hank, what's going on, buddy?
How you doing, Eric? Thanks for thinking of me.
Listen, there's no one else, honestly, that I could think of. Jeff does his thing with the Blitz, and we probably hear enough of Jeff between him and Texas Sports Unfiltered, him and Jordan both. But no one's I could think of to pinch hit for Chip in the meantime. So I appreciate you doing this. If you're joining us again, we're just going to do a quick, probably 20-25 minute episode. Don't want to go too long because obviously Chip has a lot of great nuggets coming out of SEC Media Days. They're in Destin. We have not had a chance to speak since SEC Media Days. We had a chance to talk when he was just getting there. I believe that was a Tuesday or Wednesday. We've not had a chance to recap with him post, so we will do that when he returns. But in the meantime, did not want to leave you without an episode. So we're going to keep things pretty general. We're going to do a little recruiting, obviously that being Hank's forte. Also just get Hank's general thoughts on, the 40 acres. What's going on there as far as the football program. Of course, we will acknowledge the fact that baseball coming off of, it's hard to categorize it as a disappointing loss, I guess, given the way things ended. Big 12 tournament, them losing 2 straight and then heading into the College Station Regional, where they opened with a win over Louisiana. Dropped a heartbreaker in 11 innings. That was a game I covered live in College Station. Had a chance to upset the host team in Texas A&M. And then, of course, they had a 14-hour turnaround, got shellacked by Louisiana the next day. And, of course, as we're recording this, Texas softball, they are just getting ready to take the field here in the Women's College World Series against the rival Sooners. But without further ado, we'll go ahead and jump into some football. And Hank, Chip and I have had plenty of time to talk over the off season, over spring ball, just kind of our thoughts on spring ball, but would love to get your thoughts. You can take it whatever direction you want, whether it's a 10,000 foot view, recruiting, any direction you want, but just want to get your thoughts on kind of what you saw from the Horns over the spring session.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is they've been able to kind of just carry this momentum that they built from the 2023 season throughout this offseason. There's been, really no, drama, on the field. We've seen them really only put their foot on the gas more. Obviously they lose to Washington in the college football playoff semifinal. But I think, the season can still be seen as a massive success in that they won the Big 12 championship in their final go in the conference. They make their first college football playoff. The final time it's, before it goes to a 12-team format. And then, they come out of that and use that, as a building block to really attack the transfer portal. They obviously lost some pieces through the portal. I think most of the guys, there wasn't really any major, losses in terms of guys that were going to be difference makers this upcoming season. I think, maybe you could say Terrence Brooks. Obviously, he was a starter. Austin Jordan, they lost depth there. But, they really turned that into a really strong transfer portal signing class and obviously put that on top of a really strong 2024 recruiting class out of the high school level. So, they went into the spring practices with some momentum. They looked sharp when we were able to see them in the media viewing portions. Obviously, the spring game was wildly entertaining. Turns into a shootout between Arch Manning and Trey Owens. And I think, that, final, what we saw from them on April 20th was, that was a pretty good appetizer for what should be a pretty fun team to watch this fall as they make their move to the SEC. So, I think there's a lot of pieces on this team. I think one of the biggest things that strikes me is just how deep they are, across the board. They're just, they've really built depth, and that's a credit to what the staff's been able to do on the recruiting front, and kind of just instilling this culture Steve Sarkisian's talked so much about in his time on campus. So they're deep. They're talented. They've got difference makers really at every position. If it seems like, I think if there's one area, interior defensive line, we'll see. They addressed that in the transfer portal. They got some pieces there. But beyond that, I think there's reasons to think, they can't, kind of raise their level of play a little bit across the board, in all the other spots. So exciting times. It's going to be a really fun 2024 season to cover.
It's really interesting, the depth, Hank, because that's something that Steve Sarkisian talked about multiple times during the spring. And again, we've talked about it here on the pod. I haven't had a chance to talk about it with you in terms of, he even said just to share numbers, having the ability to work two fields, having the ability to go three deep at various positions. And I think it's interesting, when I make the media rounds and people ask me, why should they believe in Texas entering the SEC in 2023? And we can talk about the schedule. Maybe we'll come to that a little later on in this episode, because it certainly is one that is favorable to the Horns. But when I just talk about or just look at the bodies on the roster, quarterback, you feel you go too deep. Running back, you definitely feel you go too deep, if not three deep. We'll talk about the receiver room in a second, but just in terms of, say, okay, sheer talent, sheer guys you've brought in, no reason to think that you don't go at least 2 and 3 deep there. I'd be interested to get your thoughts, and I'll toss it back to you in a second, but I'm interested to get your thoughts on the offensive line. That's one that does give me a little bit of pause. I mean, I just think, you knock on wood. If a Kelvin Banks were to go down, I mean, what happens there? It feels like you're almost doing a little bit of shuffling on the offensive line. But that, at least having the guys returning from last year is certainly a good starting place. You go to the defensive line. I'm of the belief, Hank, that edge is going to be this year's interior defensive line. I mean, that's a group that I think is just on the verge of really breaking out. Ethan Burke, Barron Sorrell, then you go with the guys behind them, whether it's UTSA transfer Trey Moore, someone who, ironically enough, his first big-time game at UTSA, I had a chance to cover. It was him having 2.5 sacks against Florida International. I was like, who is this kid? Granted, he did it against a makeshift offensive line. I don't think anyone's going to compare an offensive line in the SEC to the fighting Panthers down there in Conference USA. But, he's a guy to keep an eye on. Colin Simmons, Justice Finkley. So they go deep there. We will come to defensive tackle. That's something I want to ask you about, so I'll save that for a minute. But even linebacker, even the Kendrick Blackshire thing didn't work out. He, ironically enough, speaking of the Road Runners, is now at UTSA, but you got to feel confident in what you have there. And then the secondary, while it's revamped and kind of reworked, you at least feel you have enough bodies to go too deep there as well. So, yeah, just in terms of sheer volume, I do think there's something that, you really pay attention to. I want to ask you this, Hank, in terms of a two-part question. One, you covered, and for those who may not know, prior to joining Horns 24/7, you covering recruiting with Alabama, so you're kind of familiar with that program. In what ways does, and you can answer this as best you can, Hank, in what ways does this Texas roster kind of resemble, just in terms of sheer, hey, we got guys, we got bodies, we got dudes, some of those Alabama teams that you were, close to when you were covering the Crimson Tide?
Yeah, it feels a lot like, and I'm trying to think what the year was, but I think it was 2021. It was the year after they won the title over Ohio State. And it was Mac Jones. They had all Alabama, every year 3 or 4 first-round draft picks. They're able to kind of just reload, not really rebuild. So it kind of reminds me of that. It was kind of a situation where they were just so deep across the board. I'm trying to think who all it was offensive tackle. I mean, really, you could really pick any Alabama offseason. That was one thing that Nick Saban was able to really do, and really able to take advantage of in the transfer portal era too. He wasn't huge on the transfer portal, but if it was available, he was going to do it to the best of their ability, and he really did. He was able to go get difference makers, even in situations where they didn't really seem like they needed a different, or an impact guy there. Like, for example, 2021, they signed a really strong high school wide receivers class that had Ja'Cory Brooks. And obviously, hindsight's 2020. A lot of those guys didn't really fully pan out. We'll see. Brooks is still to be determined, but Christian Lear, all these guys were top 100, 5-star talent type kids, and Bama fans were used to the Jerry Jeudy's, the Devontae Smiths, those classes. So, you're thinking, wide receiver set, and they had Mechie coming back. And then they go out and add Jamison Williams from Ohio State. And everyone's kind of a head scratcher. It's like, I thought, wide receiver were set. You come to find out, like, he was one of the most important pieces of that offense. Like, you're not really sure what that season would have been. Bryce Young won the Heisman, throwing bombs to Jamison Williams. So, among other guys, but, I'm watching the softball game. Sorry, but
You're good.
this team is deep, across the board, and that's what you need. When you get into that kind of that, I guess what's the word, that mid-season SEC play. Everyone's banged up. It's a gauntlet. That's what I'm looking for. There's going to be injuries, and when you can have guys that can step up and experienced guys across the board, they did lose a lot of draft picks, but they have a lot of guys that have experience at important positions. Obviously, it starts at Quinn Ewers. It always starts at quarterback, but we talked about the offensive line, having a guy to keep Quinn Ewers upright and Kelvin Banks. You lose Christian Jones in the NFL draft, who was obviously a longtime starter and kind of a focal point on that offensive line. And, Cam Williams has been getting a lot of, rave reviews as well. And, they have a lot of depth. That was one area they didn't really seem to look in the transfer portal. I was told that, if there was a guy that was kind of a can't miss kind of talent, they maybe would have dipped into the portal, but they felt they, had pretty good depth there along the offensive line. And obviously you bring in Brandon Baker, the 5-star talent from Mater Dei High School, and a couple of kind of SEC bodies and in Daniel Cruz and Nate Kibble on the interior. And they're pretty happy with what they have. So it does remind me of Alabama. This team, they've been building towards an SEC style roster since Sark's been here. And it's definitely that and then some. I think they have one of the best rosters top to bottom in the country. And, I expect them to compete for that SEC crown in year one.
So, Hank, one of the big storylines for me, I think, on the team side is the receiver room. I'm really interested to see how this thing shapes up for a couple of reasons. One, obviously, you'd be, really adept in noting this. Guys like Jonte Cook, who obviously, got a little bit of time last year, didn't quite crack the rotation because Xavier Worthy, Jay Witt, Adonai Mitchell had that, position really locked down, but someone who was a highly talented recruit. A DeAndre Moore, who, when we had a chance to see him, looks just from a body perspective to look like a guy who could certainly give you some value there as well. But then you talk about the guys they bring in, whether it's Matt Golden, Isaiah Bond, Silas Bolden. Another guy you'd be well equipped to talk about, Ryan Wingo. I just named, 6 players, and last time I checked, I don't know very many offensive formations that you can line up 6 receivers at. This is kind of my take. And I'd be really curious. Again, you can take in any direction you want, whether it's from just a recruiting perspective as far as the talent, whether it's guys like Wingo and Moore and Cook, or whatever direction you want to take it in. But what really interests me is, so I was told is that Tom Herman, one of the things with him is that he would shuffle receivers in and out, right? You'd see sets of 2 and 3 guys coming at a time, and that was his way of getting multiple receivers on the field. And I don't think that Longhorn fans want really much of anything about Steve Sarkisian's tenure to resemble Tom Herman's, but there's probably a fair case to be made that they would like to see more receivers, or just quite frankly, see playing time. And I guess I'm curious from your perspective, Hank, given the guys they've brought in, and everyone seems to be on an even playing field, right? When we spoke with Sark, he said the reason that maybe a Jonte Cook or a Niblett or DeAndre Moore didn't see time last year was because Xavier Worthy, Jordan Winton, Adonai Mitchell earned his trust. Those are guys who he knows that they're going to do the right thing when it matters. Well, all of these guys, for all intents and purposes, are on an even playing field because they all got here at the same time, more or less. Silas Bolden is the one who got here the latest, right, in the summer. But I guess I'm just curious, maybe just your overall thoughts on that receiver room, and maybe from a recruiting perspective, some of those young guys, are they really in position to push veteran guys like Bolden and Bond and Matt Golden?
Yeah, I think they are. I think Parker Livingston and Freddie Dubose, those are probably guys that need to marinate a little bit more. And I think they're more than willing to, be team players and do that. But I think with a guy like Ryan Wingo, what we saw from him in the spring game, there was a reason, that he was their wide receiver 1 target. the whole cycle. That he's a different kind of playmaker, and I think he's absolutely someone that can challenge these older guys. And I say older guys, just like Jonte Cook, Ryan Nibble. They're not that old, but Isaiah Bond and Matt Golden, those guys have a little tenure on them. But no, and I think and Sark talked about this, I think, at the National Signing Day press conference. Someone asked him, how are you going to utilize this much talent? And he was saying, that's kind of the fun part they have to figure out. What kind of offensive sets they can run, what kind of personnel packages they can do. And, that's also, and it's also they can work itself out. It's not something where it's like, how are these? I think, as the season goes on, guys rise up to the occasion. Maybe, week one, you see Jonte Cook, Isaiah Bond, Matt Golden out there. And then, Wingo makes a big play week 2 against Michigan. He gets a little bit more trust. Like you said, it's all about trust and, the coaches being able to count on you. And, that the competition tends to work itself out. But yeah, I'm not envious of, having to decide which of these guys to keep off the field, because, this entire wide receiver room could, make arguments to be wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 at a number of high level programs. So I'm really excited to see how this shapes out. And, I think it's still important to say, like, these guys still need to work on, it's who's going to earn Quinn Ewers' trust too. Who can he kind of have that Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, relationship with, where he knows he can go to those guys in big moments. So yeah, it'll be a big summer with, just that, and like you mentioned, Silas Bolden hasn't even really thrown with Quinn Ewers. So that I'm sure they'll be, tossing around this summer a lot too. But yeah, all about that trust and, which guys can separate themselves once, the games start actually getting played.
Hank, Steve Sarkisian got a raise, if I believe my memory serves me correct. It's $10.4 million he's making this year. Those are $10.4 million decisions as far as who's going to be in the wide receiver rotation, well above our pay grade.
Yep.
Just want to run this by you before we kind of transition here. Again, you do a great job covering recruiting. Can you just talk about Texas kind of recruiting at an SEC level? I think you kind of hinted at it a little bit in an answer earlier, and I'd love to kind of get you to expound on it. And again, it doesn't have to be guys from this year's roster or, currently on the roster. It could be just recruiting in general, but maybe give the fans a little inside peek. And first off, you should be reading the Stampede. That's what you should be doing first off at horns247.com. Also, really quick before I have Hank answer that question, just take a look right down at the bottom. Join Horns 24/7 today. You'll receive 60% off your first year for industry-leading Texas Scoop. That's us. Hank, Texas recruiting at an SEC level, kind of just your overall thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think a couple things with their recruiting. I think one thing the staff's done a really good job of is they have a great staff in place. The coaches he surrounded himself with are all really high-level recruiters. You could really make a case for each of them, whether it be Tashard Choice, whose resume as both coach and recruiter speaks for itself. Chris Jackson, who's going into his second year as wide receivers coach and passing game coordinator. He's shown that, he can get these big name guys. I mean, Ryan Wingo, Isaiah Bond, year one, that's a pretty good, thing to hang your hat on. I can go on and on. Jeff Banks is obviously a stellar recruiter. Kyle Flood recruits offensive linemen pretty successfully and so on. And so that's a big thing. He's surrounded himself with recruiters, guys that can build relationships. And it's really important in this NIL era that, you still have to kind of go back to that relationship building kind of thing, because, with NIL, not a lot of schools, but schools kind of can be more on equal footing, I guess, when you're going up against, the Ohio States and the Georgias, the Alabamas, the Floridas, when it comes to that. But, really being able to connect with these kids and, still have that bond there and be able to evaluate them, not only from a talent standpoint, but from a culture standpoint and, talking about, what kind of personalities you want to bring into your locker room, and not kind of, disrupting, the culture that they've worked so hard to build. That's obviously shown, with what the team they put together so far. So that's a big thing. I think another big thing is they've really focused, and not to say, Charlie Strong era or Tom Herman era didn't, but I think they've done a really good job of in-state recruiting. And, when you look at successful programs, in-state recruiting, they call it the lifeblood of your program. You have to get the big names in state, that you can't whiff on those guys. And, you can look back in different coaching tenures, whether, not getting Garrett Wilson, not getting Jackson Smith and Jigba, or, a handful of other guys. Texas, they if it's someone they want, obviously, if it's a position of need, that's different. But guys like DeCorian Moore, that's their top target in 2024 on the offensive side of the ball, maybe top target overall, number one wide receiver in the country, difference maker kind of player. I don't say anyone's a can't miss kind of guy just because of this era of college football we're in. Transfer portal can cover up high school misses all the time. But DeCorian Moore is pretty close. I think many people would tell you he's probably one of the best high school players I've ever seen. And so, they're going after him. They look like they're in good position there. You look back last cycle, Colin Simmons, the number one edge rusher in the country, 5-star out of another Duncanville 5-star. They were able to land him. So so on. You're back to 2022 with Kelvin Banks, DJ Campbell, all those guys. So, I think they've done a really good job of focusing on the in-state, but not being afraid to, expand their footprint. Texas does really well on the West Coast. They just got Brandon Baker this past cycle out of California, the 5-star offensive tackle. We've seen them really active in the state of Florida. We've seen them really active in the state of Georgia. So they're really expanding their footprint and kids are taking notice. Kids are, the kids today don't remember Texas of, the Vince Young days or prior to that, or even Colt McCoy. But, they're starting to take notice now of kind of the brand. The brand's always been there, obviously, but they're starting to pay attention a little bit more to Texas, and making the playoff helps with that. But they're also working hard in those areas and recruiting those areas hard. I mean, the first 3 commitments of this 2025 class were from Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. So that kind of just shows you like they're in it in the SEC, like that they're in this. That's literally the most Southeastern conference you can get. So they're doing a good job of expanding their footprint. Still, falling back on in-state recruiting, making sure that the relationships are there. Making sure they're connecting with the in-state high school coaches. That's a big thing too. You go to this high school coach conference in the summer, and it's important to have the Texas High School Football Association to have your back. They're all in it together. So they've done a good job of that there as well. And so it's all those things mixed together, the staff they have in place, the resources they have in place. NIL is obviously a huge thing. Texas has done probably the best job of any program with that, with the one fund and, being able to put all that together. So overall, recruiting's, it's going really well. Texas is in. I talked to one guy in the NIL space saying, looking forward in the next 10 years, there's no school better positioned than Texas in this kind of college football era. So things are clicking in Austin for sure.
Hank, you touched on something there that's really been intriguing to me from the team side. And maybe this is probably a byproduct of me being a Floridian, but you talked about Texas's footprint. That's one of the things that I've really wanted to ask Steve Sarkisian, but, the timing just hasn't really worked out considering, I've got plenty of things on the team side to ask him about. And I'll leave that to you and Jordan Scruggs to kind of decipher. But them expanding their footprint, again, I'm a soon-to-be 33-year-old Floridian. Growing up, like Texas was the Vince Young era Texas, of course, right? I mean, that's 20 years ago, but you knew about that, right? But outside of that, Texas was never really a brand in Florida. I mean, we know who the big brands were, right? Florida State, Miami, and then even some of the, Georgias and Alabamas and schools of that nature. Even, you put other various SEC schools there. So I think just from a curiosity perspective, I was always kind of intrigued at how this move for Texas to the SEC would kind of fare, but you did a great job of laying it out. I mean, not only are they being Texas recruiting their backyard, but they're getting into Georgia. They're getting into Alabama. They're getting into the Sunshine State. And when I was back home for about 2.5 weeks, I had a chance to talk with, some high school coaches. I was from my time being in South Florida, my time, I was growing up in Central Florida area. I just was curious, like, hey, what do you guys, what's the feeling on Texas? And whether it was, just kids on teams or coaches, they were like, listen, we're hearing more and more about them wanting to get in these areas and make a push, especially South Florida. That's an area that, you're not going to win, right, against a Miami or the Florida schools. And listen, Hank, you're more equipped to say this than I am. Everyone recruits South Florida. Every school in the nation has a South Florida guy on their staff who recruits that area, right? But if there's a big-time target that you can go in there and get, I think Texas is equipped at least with A, exposure, and then B, some of the opportunities that they can present in the NIL space to go in there and get a guy. So that's, really interesting to me. We'll get ready to wrap up here. We're already at 25 minutes. I said I wouldn't keep you longer than 30. So we'll transition into, some current recruiting stuff. And Hank, if you just kind of want to give the folks, your thoughts on the current verbals that Texas does have. Maybe give them a little peek into that, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so they're sitting on 10 guys, 10 commitments right now, number 15 class in the country. So about where they were, I want to say last year around this time. I think it's been a really interesting shift over the last 2 years. Since they've implemented summer official visits, it was like the first summer, few guys took summer official visits, but they really wanted to come in the fall for the games. Now it's everyone's fighting tooth and nail to get the summer official visits. Like that's when they want these kids in town in Texas more than, they've shown that more than really anyone. We're seeing, this upcoming weekend, I think we have 6 expected on the list currently. And then the 2 weekends after that, it's, I think 20 plus each weekend, which is wild, but that's kind of the trend now. Everyone's fighting for these summer official visits. But, as they enter the summer, number 15 in the country, there's going to be a flurry of commitments as the summer goes on, as the official visits wrap up into July. We're going to see kids start popping left and right, just like we did last summer. Kids want to make decisions before their senior seasons. But, right now, 10 commitments, number 15 class in the country. The headliner commitment is Lance Jackson. We have him ranked as a defensive lineman on 24/7 Sports. I think we're going to see him play edge. He's lean. He's not one of these big, interior guys that we see them go after. He's not a Devondre Sweat or, Byron Murphy. He's a guy that, he's probably going to be more of an edge guy for Texas. But currently we have him ranked as a defensive lineman, and a really good one at that. I think we have him, what is he at currently? Number 10 in the country, number 65 overall. We saw him at Under Armour Houston, and he had a really good showing. So he's the top-rated guy in the class right now. After him, Elijah Bo Barnes, linebacker target from Dallas Skyline. Really talented kid, one of their top linebacker targets, kind of fits the bill for what, Johnny Nansen has been looking for, kind of these taller, athletic linebackers, that he wants in his system since he's come in place for Jeff Choate. And then down the line, James Simon, recent running back commit from Shreveport, 4-star running back. Another, SEC footprint kind of example. Texas goes into, I guess Shreveport isn't really Baton Rouge's backyard, but still same state. They go, he was a guy LSU was recruiting hard, wanted. Texas wins it out for James Simon, big time pickup there. I just have the class pulled up. KJ Lacey, 4-star quarterback from Alabama. This is a guy, it's been a discussion we've been having on Horns 24/7 a bunch because, we just saw Keelan Russell, the 4-star SMU commit, flip to Alabama on Tuesday. And there was a lot of, talk whether Texas was going to make a push for Keelan Russell as well to join the class with KJ Lacey. Excuse me. But Texas never ended up offering. And, they've been thrilled with Lacey since he committed this time last summer. And looks like they're sticking with that. There was, talking with sources, there was a feeling that Texas might make this a 2-quarterback class, but just because if you look in the future, assuming Quinn Ewers leaves for the NFL draft after this season, your quarterback roster is Arch Manning and Trey Owens. And then you add KJ Lacey. So if you look at the 2025 class, 2-quarterback class makes sense. I just don't think Keelan Russell was a guy that wanted to be in a 2-quarterback class. I think KJ Lacey would have been okay with it, but a lot of guys were recruiting Keelan Russell for QB1, and Alabama wanted out for him. But really talented kid from Saraland, Alabama. Amari Winston, the 4-star tight end from Georgia. Another one of these kids that, maybe more of kind of like a, inline guy, I guess, just under 6'2", 254. So bigger kid, but he makes plays. You turn on his film, he can do a little bit of both. He's not just solely an inline blocker. He can stretch the field a little bit. He's a basketball player. So, kind of one of those jumbo athletes, I guess you could classify him for Amari Winston, but a guy that they've liked for a while. The Coleman twins that just committed 2 weeks ago, the interior offensive lineman from Cedar Hill, they're actually triplets, and they're the third brother committed on a preferred walk-on offer as well. But Jordan and Devin are the scholarship additions. Jordan runs 6'5", 350 pounds. Devin is 6'4", 340 pounds. So it kind of fits the bill for a Kyle Flood offensive lineman, size with athleticism. And, both of them have it. Jordan could probably play tackle if needed, but I think both those guys could are going to project interior in the end. I just got a bad cough. I'm sorry.
You're good, Hank.
Excuse me. Ricky Stewart, the running back that's paired with James Simon, their top in-state target at the running back position. He had been committed to SMU. He got the offer at junior day, flipped to Texas a few months back. And then you got Jackson Christian, another interior guy. Jackson Christian's he's kind of flown relatively under the radar, but he's like one of those guys you just need in your class. A guy that, you never need to question work ethic. He knows where he needs to be. He knows what he has to do. Kid just loves the Texas Longhorns. And he's just kind of like, he just grinds it out. Like he's just a really powerful, just, SEC road grader kind of talent. So I think Texas fans will be really excited about him. When we look back on this class 3 years down the road, I think he's going to be a guy that really stands out. And then lastly, Brandon Brown, the 4-star defensive lineman, who I kind of have on flip-flops right now. He's a guy that committed to Bo Davis back in December from Florida. Obviously, Bo Davis left, went to LSU. Texas hired Kenny Baker, who's getting rave reviews in the recruiting trail. I think it's only a matter of time before guys start, that position starts really exploding in this 2025 cycle. But Brandon Brown seems pretty enamored with LSU. He just took his official visit this past weekend. I think he's probably going to flip. But again, I've heard he's really impressionable. So, he still has official visits coming up. So maybe he, comes back to Texas on an official visit, kind of falls in love again with that. So still to be determined, but it's looking like at this point, Brandon Brown's probably going to flip. So that's the class right now. It's going to grow. I think if we record this again here in 2 months, it's probably going to be 20 plus commitments just with the work they're going to put in this summer. So, all the makings of another top 5 group, in my opinion.
All good stuff there, Hank. Let's just finish up here. And a guy who's really kind of, again, me being biased, probably being from Florida, this guy's caught my eye a little bit, but also being rather familiar with the school that his father is an alumni of, Florida National University. Dia Bell, son of former San Antonio Spur Raja Bell, Dallas Maverick Raja Bell. I guess he's probably been the whole Texas Triangle for who knows as far as his basketball career. But a 2026 prospect who is, if memory serves me correct, Hank, he is a 5-star kid already at this point. Just curious, kind of your thoughts. It's interesting. We were talking about Texas kind of getting into the Sunshine State. I know they were recruiting, maybe at whatever level you can, say yay or nay, but they were kind of recruiting Will Griffin, who was a kid who just committed to Florida. So getting in there as far as the Sunshine State Arms. But Dia Bell, just kind of give the folks a little bit on him as a 5-star kid in the class of 2026.
Yeah, one of the positives of covering Texas recruiting is, when they make a quarterback offer, they're very selective with their quarterback offers, I should say. They're not just going to throw out 10 offers, say come camp. Like they take their time with evaluations. They go out and see these kids. They bring them in for camp. And we saw that this past Saturday. Dia Bell camped, who's, top target at quarterback. Troy Hoon, another top target at quarterback in the 2026 class. And everyone thinks like, oh, they're going into their junior years of high school. But, quarterback is historically a position that, these guys commit earlier and earlier. We saw KJ Lacey commit prior to his junior season this past year. They usually try to get their spots, and then, the classes are kind of built around them. So, it's typical to see, junior going into their junior year quarterbacks, rising juniors commit, prior to that season just to, start to build around them. But Dia Bell camped this past Saturday. This was his second visit to Texas. He was actually on the sideline with his dad at the spring opener for practice, or spring practice opener for Texas back in March. He was there on hand watching them. Got the offer on that visit. Came back for the camp, and we're told had a really strong performance. I think entering the camp, I think it was very clear Dia Bell, Troy Hoon were the 2 top guys they like, and I think that's kind of still where we're at. I like the chances a little bit better with Dia Bell just from having talked with him and getting his thoughts on the visit. I talked to both of them. I caught up with Dia on the phone after his visit. We saw Troy in the parking lot leaving. Both had obviously great things to say. With Troy, I got the vibe that he's still taking some visits, and I asked him if he was going to come back in the fall. He said maybe. Kind of got the vibe maybe he's not really as trending towards Texas maybe we thought earlier. But with Dia, I think with his performance at camp, with the staff pushing for him, he seems to be more kind of on an expedited timeline of making a decision here after this round of summer visits. And he's going to go to FSU, he's going to LSU and Ohio State, so he's got some more trips. But he picked Texas to come back to first. And again, we were talking with him, and he was talking about he's done his research on Texas. Obviously, he's seen what Steve Sarkisian's been able to do in terms of quarterback development. He even mentioned He said the Manning family trusted them to send Arch to, so that's got to mean they're doing something really well just in that fact, or like in that instance alone. Obviously, we saw the year Quinn Ewers still had a stellar season, even missing a few games with injury. And we've seen his progression throughout the couple of years he's been playing in Austin. So, I think Diabell likes Texas a lot. I would pick Texas. We made in a Stampede, we did kind of a 10 players from last Saturday's camp that we think could end up in this class in 2026, and Diabell was on there. And I'm not ruling out Troy Hoon. I think he could still absolutely be in this class as well. But I think all the signs are pointing to Diabell a little bit more right now. And maybe we'll find out that in a few weeks when he's done with these visits. So you got to outlast. He's not visiting slouch programs. He's going to some other very quarterback friendly schools as well. But Steve Sarkisian's proven he can recruit the top guys, and Diabell seems to be that for them.
Great stuff, Hank. He is Hank South, recruiting extraordinaire for Horns 24/7. I said, look down, join Horns 24/7 today. Receive 60% off. That is going to be running through July 11th. So phone a friend, tell a friend, text a friend. There's no better time to sign up, get 60% off. Industry leader in Texas coverage. Appreciate Hank for making the time. Chip Brown will be back next week. We will talk all things SEC meetings. We'll talk Texas softball. Of course, their Women's College World Series will be done by that time. We'll probably catch up on some Texas baseball as well. See a lot of the questions on our boards. We've been doing these staff AMAs daily. A lot of the questions, at least that came through for me today, as we're taping this on June 5th, has been, what's going to be the stats of David Pierce? Maybe in a week's time, we'll have more clarity on that. But until then, thank y'all for listening. We cannot thank you enough. Listen, subscribe, do whatever you need to do, but find it at horns247.com. And as Chip Brown would say, stay safe and keep the faith.